All right, so as we get into the top 10 albums of October, I think it's important to note that I'm just kind of behind on considering the year and editorializing the year in presenting something that has the depth of what I've kind of presented in the past. But notably, I think the important thing is that I'm going to be shifting more towards what I can get done in a reasonable amount of time rather than taking on long and deeply involved projects that don't really have as much reason for reasonable focus in 2024 and beyond. I did write up a big editorial, and I sort of left it to die back in kind of August after I wrote it, as we kind of finished the seventh year and reached that point. It'll make more sense to talk about that when this first year of Mystification Zine wraps up, and I'll talk more about that in December and what I'll do differently in 2025, where my time will go, and maybe just about the need to do other projects as well. So, in terms of compartmentalizing different subgenres and covering things that I haven't covered in the past, I'll be bringing back Nothing But Black Metal November here shortly. The first one will be over the weekend, and the subgenre specific end of the year lists that just collect things that I missed will come back as well. There'll probably be longer lists, there'll probably be shorter reviews, and I'll just kind of gather everything that I can within reason until my brain explodes and I just can't be bothered to do it anymore. But so far I have I think 8 lists planned, probably more in terms of subgenre. That's something to look forward to. I don't know if I'll make videos this year for all of them, but certainly for some of the death metal and the black metal and whatnot that people tend to actually go and watch and listen. Otherwise, October was a good month. It was a great month. There was a ton of solid death metal in particular records. You'll find that here, but also a good variety of subgenre elsewhere. And that leads us to the way that I'm going to be doing these lists going forward. It's going to be a top 20 overall, but I'm going to list the first 10 here as just something you can click on and check out as you will. So for number 10, we have Black Evil. This is the third full-length album from this band out of Germany, and it would be easy to liken their kind of modus to what Butcher does, in the sense that it is heavy metal influenced black and thrash metal, black speed metal, and epic heavy metal at once, and they're moving away from the extreme metal lean of their sound and more into the traditional heavy metal side of things in terms of composition and, in some sense, voicing. The great thing about this record, and why I put it above the breakthrough that was that Butcher album, was that this one felt like more of an underground heavy metal record in general. It felt more cohesive in general, while also keeping every single song singular, in the sense that they all felt like they stood on their own and they all added to the variety of the full listen. It's a very strong album, and one that was a little bit unassuming to approach, considering that, you know, black thrash metal is not really all that exciting day to day anymore like it was about 5 or 6 years ago. But I think this band stands out very much on this record, and it's worth sitting with it and seeing what they've developed here, because it is something special, and there's only a handful of bands that can do this in such a way that it feels varietal. At number 9, we have Tassel of Aries. This is the latest kind of surprise release from Serpent Column, who have returned with an album that I believe was just basically finished, and he just pressed publish on it and was ready to go with it not long after completing it. And it doesn't sound haphazard. It actually sounds well considered. It's a very atmospheric and almost demented, circuitous version of Serpent Column that we haven't heard for a while in terms of straightforward riff-focused craft. It does feel like a return to the style of the first record, and it does feel like they, in a sense, they've delivered on the promise of the early promise of the band, while having taken such a strong experimental curve over time that we're getting the experimental essence of the band, we're getting the atmospheric reach of the band, and a lot of things that were missing from their later discography as they quickly evolved and iterated. So in a way, I'm kind of getting everything I wanted from Serpent Column all at once in a very densely stated set of events. And I haven't really sat down and written the review yet in full, because I've just kind of wanted to enjoy the album, and it's not that deep, it's not that hard to get into it. It's just 4 songs, and two of them are quite long. But I think it's worth giving the guys some extra consideration, and I think that this is probably one of the better Serpent Column releases in terms of just general approachability and coherence. And I think that the myriad kind of compositional genius and the in the moment flexion of things available to Serpent Column really shines here in a way that it's not dumbed down, but it's just been presented in a way that is just kind of grand in the way that it sits. And I really just enjoyed it quite a bit. So obviously very high scores, definitely worth checking out if you are not familiar with the band. And I think it's one of the just a standout artist of the last 10 years or so in general. So check that out. I mean, every release from Sedimentum, this Quebec-based death doom metal band, is fantastic, and this latest EP is no different. I would say a 20-minute EP. I don't know if I'm really gonna dig into it if it's not fantastic, and this is actually a great EP. It really adds to their discography. I love this sound. I love the look of it. It's every release has improved from this band. It was great to see them lean into kind of almost a funeral death doom level sound, and they have the riffs to back it up still. This is just a very impressive group, and this was an EP. It's rare that I just can't put down an EP, but this is exactly the sound that I wanted in the moment. It's something I don't get a ton of in any great quality, and I think this is just a great band and a great addition to their discography. It'd be interesting to see them add this to their oeuvre rather than just iterate upon it. But either way, they're doing great things, and this is like top tier death doom for my taste. After several years, I think, what do you want from a Geigen album? Something that's technical, that's completely out there, that's challenging, and I think they've delivered kind of the typhoon of cosmic energy you'd expect. This is definitely a brutal technical death metal album with a lot of force behind it, but they've gotten even more imaginative with their use of guitar effects. They've cut down on the kind of the cacophony of Geigen and focused more on the flow, the dynamic, the movement through the record, so that it feels pulverizing and intense, but they still find a way to kind of sweep the listener along in a way that is repeatable and experimental in a way that it keeps them in that realm of like adjacent to like a Portal or something like that, but still doing their own thing and still out there in a very different way. So for me, I just loved it. I thought it was a great album. It's just one of the cooler death metal things that we just need more of. And it's also just a singular thing. So very happy to see them back and doing their thing. The second full length from Asuite, this Brazilian black death thrash metal band, is like kind of a love letter to 80s black death metal out of South America. It's a very Brazil specific sound, and it's just a class work altogether. It's a fantastic group. I think the idealism, the intensity, the performances, the render of the record, and the way that it stands out, the way the rhythm section just kind of slaps throughout the whole thing. It's like they've gotten the intensity of it right, but they haven't just flatly copied the old ways in terms of their compositions and the way they put it together. There's just like a frantic energy behind it that is inspired. And for me, that it takes me back to, again, like what really inspired me to listen to like death metal and death thrash metal back in the day with records like Morbid Visions and whatnot. And so for me, this is just a great reminder of what I love about extreme metal, and a very condensed and a tribute to it as well. So it's a pretty great inspired event for my taste. I think it's important when if you listen to death metal or black metal that you have heard it in a live setting. You've heard it done well in a live setting and you've heard it done poorly in a live setting because you get a sense for what is realistic in terms of an actual performance and what is possible on a record. And when I approached this New Zealand slash Canada based group, the interesting thing was that the render of this album was more realistic than usual. It wasn't that there was a ton of mistakes or that anything was off. It was that there's an organic focus here that gives you the sound of the band. It gives you the feeling of their performance in, as one, even though I don't know that they've ever played in the same room. This is kind of an interesting project in terms of the ferocity of it, the thoughtfulness of it, and also the dark presentation of it, which is never assuming, but always intense and brutal and upfront. And so there's a strong technical aptitude and a very strong organic feeling that never feels like absolute looseness. And there's a lot to say about this record. I feel like people didn't necessarily dig into it as much as I did in terms of who I talked to about it. But I felt like this is a very high standard for like what is real about death metal, what is like frighteningly violent about death metal, and how to transmit that from real performances into recorded performances. And I feel like there's no smoke and mirrors here. There's just the raw intensity of the band in a way that still sounds great. And I think it was just something I fixated on for a couple of weeks here in the month beyond the review, where it changed a little bit of what I want out of death metal. I'm always looking for a raw and realistic sound, a presence that is unique, and I think that this band has a lot of potential to keep building that unique presence and the dark way that it plays out with these very strong nihilistic themes on the nature of man and existence. I think people who've known me for long enough, at least 10 years or so, I've always focused very much on what has the best riffs. So that's just kind of one of the reasons I got into metal. Like thrash was always a huge thing. Death metal was kind of the death thrashing apex of that in the 80s death metal. And a band like Aberration is kind of exactly right back into that pocket of underground death metal perfection. It's just got so many riffs. It's just such intensity, and I feel like they just explode out of the gates with this record. I mean, of course, it sounds a bit like early Morbid Angel, but what doesn't, in some sense, this is a very direct, both tribute to 80s death metal, but also their own intensity to it, and you'd expect that much from the folks involved and their associated acts. But this isn't a throwaway. This isn't like a funny one-off band. It's more like, for me, this feels like a very serious directive and a love of death metal. You can feel in every riff. For me, it was just a very exciting album and one that I'm still listening to. Once again, we find Norwegian death metal band Shari Moth evolving quite a bit in between each release. This is their third full-length album, and Devildom has a way of kind of hooked me in very strongly for its more declarative moments, for its dynamic production sound and its rhythmic intensity. But there's both classic and new feeling elements to this record that keep it particularly intense. It keeps it in the realm of death metal and more so closer to the style of their debut, where there was certainly an influence from black metal. So there was a heavy influence from spirituality, but there's also a straightforward nature. There's something that reaches directly for the listener and grips in a way that a lot of death metal just doesn't anymore today. And I feel like there's a classic sensibility there. There's a dramatism to it as well. The whole package here is just very impressive. I think this is just easily an enormous improvement in some ways as far as what I'm looking for in this level of intensity and rhythmic detail, and just a record that I love sitting with. The mouth that burns with the flames of perdition will consume creation in the well of oblivion. I I can always guarantee that I'm going to listen to a new side project or main entry in the Rancy Pazuzu lore. I think that this one is particularly out there. It's particularly abrasive. It takes a lot of daring moves. It feels like this is a step beyond anything they've done in the past. It is great to see a band willing to do something different rather than stick to their guns and iterate and just tour off of the same record over and over. And I think this is an exciting outcome from this. It's a volatile, it's still a volatile substance that they're coming up with, and I think that's what's exciting about this band is that they're not necessarily resting in one corridor or another. It is willing to get lost in its thoughts. It is willing to go all the way out there and reach out into space and grab something ugly and something weird along the way. Now the big bass-driven grooves are still there. There's a lot of the signature of the band right there, but they're still working on that changeling attitude. They're looking for something new, and I like that this record was kind of built upon the back of the previous record, being a direct exaggeration of it in a live setting that became a full album in the way that they created it. I think it's it's cool to see that it's a very old school method of finding a way to iterate or continue on a path without necessarily starting completely over. And it does feel like they've taken a chunk out of themselves, a slice out of themselves, and made it into something bigger than what they were doing in the past. So it's cool to see. It's a really great band. And of course, the album of the month is Cosmic Putrefaction's Emerald Fires Atop the Farewell Mountains. I think, as a continuation of the general storyline that's been going through the last several albums, and as an exploration of the self and capability and composition, this is obviously a frenzied note. This is a very affected and disastrous sort of event that feels like it is the nuclear option. It feels like it's doing everything it can to fire up and superheat all of the elements of cosmic putrefaction is something that is bigger than itself almost. But also it's a good death metal album in the sense that it's just very well performed. It has riffs all over the place. It's exaggerative. It's blackened in some places. It's progressive in others. It's technical throughout. It's almost uniformly brutal. It's actually kind of on the attack most of the way through. But there are points where it stops and it thinks and it slows down and it becomes all the more profound each time I pass through. And what I found was I thought, well, maybe this will be in maybe the top 5 for the month. Maybe I'll, it's good to see the artist working on something that's continuing this thread, but I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't expecting it to continue to impress me the more I looked into it. I wasn't expecting it to continue to find these gnarled edges that kept me coming back and listening again. There were a couple of just very intense points on some of these songs where I wanted to continue. I wanted to find a point where I could loop it and just kind of stick with it, because it's that feeling like the artist put so much work into every song that you could take the ideas from one piece and make an album out of each one, because it's that detailed and their level of performance is that high that you feel like you're really getting the maximum density of ideas and flourishes and touches and everything that you could fit in without becoming a complete wall of noise. And for some people, it might very well be a wall of noise, but for me, it was the best album I listened to all month, and one that will definitely be up there on my best of the year list. So check that out for yourself.